Welcome back, Sweet Chris here. In this video, we're going to take a look at customizations in NetSuite. And when I say that, I'm talking specifically about creating custom records, custom lists, fields, forms, that type of thing. I'm not including workflows and scripting, even though technically those are included within the customizations tab. I've covered workflows in other videos, and scripting really requires you to have JavaScript knowledge. So we're not going to talk about that, just this kind of core aspect of customizations. And I really consider that customizations are one of the three most important tools that any administrator or consultant has available to them. It's something that if you can learn well, you can really go far as a professional admin or consultant. Now in this video, there's only so much I can talk about because there's really a lot of depth to customization. So I'm really just gonna frame this video around one particular scenario or example and really touch on two aspects of customization, which would be forms and fields. And even in those realms, I'm only gonna really get into the basic level of customization. I'm sure I'll make additional videos at a certain point where I dive further into additional aspects of customization and some of the deeper mechanics, but for now, we're gonna keep it pretty light. If you do wanna know more about customizations, I have an entire module where I really go into quite a bit of detail on it in my Administrator Fundamentals course. I also have entire modules on workflows and just everything that a good administrator or consultant should know. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the link and take advantage of that course. But in this video, we're going to keep it pretty narrow in scope just to make sure that the video doesn't go on forever and that it is kind of a bite-sized chunk. So with that, let's take a look at this. All right, so we're here in NetSuite, and the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna open up a sales order. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna come down to sales order, and it brings us to this page. Now, before I really dive into the customization aspect, one thing you really need to understand for the sake of this is the concept of forms. So you can see custom form here, we have sales order selected. If you don't know what a form is, the concept is basically a sales order is a record, just like any other record. This concept applies to anything. So we've got this sales order record and we want to interface and interact with a sales order, but we need some sort of a medium between us and this record. And what that interface is called a form. So the best way to visualize it, in my opinion, is really just to see how forms differ from one to the next. So all of these different fields and their arrangement, how they're placed, all of these different aspects are really dictated by the form itself. So right now we're looking at this sales order from the standpoint of a form called sales order. But let's choose a different one. Let's come up here and select the item substitution form. So once we do that, notice what happens to the screen. Don't look at any one particular thing, but just overall, you can see the form is totally different. There's way more fields, they're organized differently. And if we go to an additional form, let's select GB sales order. Once again, a totally different layout. Way less fields available, really crunched down to just a very select amount of information that you're gonna put in for this sales order. Now the record hasn't changed, right? We're still creating a sales order, but this interface has now dictated that there's much less information we need to put in to create this sales order. Let's take one last example. And now over here, the form is selected. I'm gonna show you an enhanced sales order form. That's just the name of this form. Again, it looks very different. The formatting is quite different. And in this one, it's even formulated so that the form option is not available anywhere on here. So if I wasn't in the administrator role and this was a default form that I was stuck with, I couldn't even change the form however I wanted to. I couldn't modify it anywhere here. So in this case, I'm just gonna hit back so I can come back to a normal form. And I'll use this to come over here and just go back to my original sales order form. So this is what we're going to use for this particular video. It's a custom, but otherwise a relatively generic form. Obviously, it's just called sales order. And there are a lot of different types of forms you can create. If I come up here to the customizations tab, down to forms, you can create transaction forms. So that would be pretty obviously. Anything for invoices, sales orders, returns, anything like that, you would do a transaction-based form. There's also address forms, and pretty much anything that doesn't fall under those two categories, you'll find under entry forms. So that's like customers, employees, vendors, items. Those are all considered part of entry forms. So that's just a concept of forms and what that even means. So on this form, this is going to be the scenario. We want to add a field right down here called gift. And it's going to be a checkbox. And basically, when a sales representative is filling in this sales order, then when they select gift, that means that the customer is buying this item and they intend to gift it to someone else. So maybe whatever the item is, we throw in a little sticker that has a to and a from so that the person can gift it to a family or a friend. So it's just going to be a simple checkbox. Again, this is a very, very easy example, but I'm going to use it to kind of outline and show a lot of the features that relate to custom fields and custom forms. So the first thing that we want to do, if we come over here on the right, this is where you can actually customize whatever the type of thing is that you're currently on. So we're on a sales order and specifically on the sales order form. So when we're coming up here, we're going to customize some aspect of that. And we might think that we'd want to customize the form, right, to change what we can see here and add this custom field of a gift in, but currently that field doesn't exist. So really what we need to do first is we need to create a custom field called gift. Then we can add it to this form. So let's start with that. We're going to come down to new body field. I'm going to open that up in a new tab. And if I come to that, we can see we've got our new transaction body field. So let's call that gift. And we're going to add a description. I always give this as a recommendation, especially if you're an admin or a consultant, which you would be if you're doing anything like this. Adding in these descriptions, it's easy to pass over it in the beginning, but so often a year down the line or 5 years down the line, you or somebody else is going to come along and really have no idea what this field is doing or why it was first created. Not just for this particular example, but in all instances. It's always good to actually put a simple description so that people know what this thing is doing. So let's write, when checked, this field indicates that the customer intends to gift this item to another person. Very simple. All right, so then we come over here to type, and field type is one of the most important aspects of creating a new field. This is where you're dictating what type of field is this. So just as an example here, this is a drop-down list that we can select from. This is a normal free-form text field. We've got larger text fields where you can have like paragraphs. There's checkboxes. There's a lot of different options. And as you can see here, there's quite a number of different options. And it might seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but really there's only a handful of kind of categories of fields. So for example, if you want to just type out text, like a name or a memo line, there's several different options that are really all just variations of text. Sometimes you can write more text, less text, a larger text space, things like that. When it comes to numbers, whether it's a phone number or a numerical amount, a percentage, there's a few variations on that concept. There's a couple variations on lists. Sometimes it's a list where you select one thing. Sometimes you can select multiple things in one list. So there's also date fields, etc. So really only a few different categories that you can pretty easily get a grip on. And then there's several variations for each category. So that's the basic concept. But in this particular example, we're just going to keep it to a very simple checkbox. So we're going to select checkbox. And the rest of the options, both down here and over here, most of them relate to other types of fields that you can create. And they just go a little bit deeper into the system than I have time to go through in this video. So if you want a much more detailed walkthrough of all of these different settings, of course, you can always click on these things and read the field help. Sometimes it's not always the most descriptive or it doesn't easily explain things. So again, if you check out the Administrator Fundamentals course, I really walk through these in quite a bit of detail. So moving on to the next kind of major category that we need to talk about is down here with applies to. And as the name implies, this is basically stating when we create this field, what things can it apply to? In this case, if we're talking about applying this to a sales order, then of course sale is already selected. It knows to check that one. We could select other things though. If this was something that could apply to, let's say, purchase orders or refunds and credit memos and all these other different things, we could simply select the various categories here. So I'm fine with sale because I wouldn't want gift to be on any other type of record. So we're going to move on to display. Now, the main thing, really two main things to understand here in display is first, the subtab. So this is the subtab bar, right? And more importantly, if we go back to our sales order and down here, this is the subtab. The question is, where do we want to put this field? Do we want to put it under items, under promotion, or do we want to put it up here in the main section? Well, as I pointed out at the beginning, I want to include it right here. So I do want to put it in the main section. So if I come back to this transaction body field, subtab, I would put in main, I would select that, and it would be located somewhere in that main section. Now I can use the insert before to try to narrow down exactly where I'm placing it. I highly recommend you don't do it that way. However, it's better to simply create the field, put it in the right general area, and then use the customization of the form to actually tweak and modify exactly where that field's gonna go. It's much easier to do it there than to try to do it straight up on the field itself. So we're gonna leave that one blank. And I'm actually gonna undo this. I'm gonna leave this one blank as well. That's not recommended. I'm actually gonna do it this way because the odds are at some point in your life, you're gonna accidentally leave this field blank. And I wanna show you what happens in that case and how to fix it. The next important thing to talk about here is the display type. So if you look at here, there's 4 different display types. Normal is obviously very straightforward. Any one of these fields that you're seeing here, these are normal fields. They're ones that you can edit, you can put information in, take information out, etc. Inline text, if we come over to our sales order, this is an example of inline text. This is something that it is going to display to you what information is in that field, but it's not going to allow you to edit it. So that's an example of inline text. The next one is disabled. Disabled, you can see that from this, where sometimes there will be information in that field, but you're not able to interact with it in any way. Now, that's more commonly used where there's something that you, in certain situations, don't want people to touch. So maybe certain roles will be able to influence that field, other roles will not be able to. Or maybe there's certain circumstances when you can edit or interact with that field. For example, because I've selected checkbox, I can't influence this field, but if I changed it to list record, suddenly this would be available and other fields here would also come off of being disabled. So that's a much more common use for that field type. Lastly, we have hidden. That's pretty straightforward. If there's certain instances where you don't even just want it disabled, but you don't want the person interacting with this field to even know that that field exists. For example, let's say there's a form, and if you have sales reps going on that form, there's just fields you don't even want them to see because you don't want them getting confused. You can make those fields hidden for those particular people. So those are the 4 display types. You're going to see that again when we get to the form, but really in the field level it's an important aspect of what you're setting up this field to be natively. Next over from that, we have validation and defaulting. This has a few different settings. Some of them don't apply to the checkbox that we've selected, but one thing that does apply is we can select it to be default checked. In other words, if this was a field we were adding where in the vast majority of cases, we wanted it to be selected and we want that to be the default and people can unselect it if relevant, we would select this default checked and have that be the circumstance. Of course, in present time, gifting is probably by far the minority of cases. We're going to unselect that. Over from there, we have sourcing and filtering. Just a real quick concept of this. For example, if you're filling in a customer field, notice that certain fields beneath it will automatically fill in, such as the subsidiary, which is linked to the customer field. The fact that that field automatically fills in with information, that is called sourcing. So it's going to source that information from another record and another field. And this is where you would basically tell it where to source information from. Of course, for our checkbox field, it's totally inapplicable, so we'll move on. Access, this is basically saying at a field level, do we want to give access in terms of who can interact and have this field? There's actually a lot of different levels of access and permissions, basically, when it comes to roles, forms, fields, records. There's all these different layers of permissions. And if you're ever having a problem where you don't understand why a certain role is having a hard time or not seeing certain things and other people can, or you've created something and you can't find it anywhere, you might want to take a look at the various levels of permissions and just see if there's anything weird turned on or restricted at one of the particular levels that could be causing a problem that you wouldn't otherwise think of. So I don't recommend putting any kind of access points at a field level. If you know it well enough that you have a very good reason to do so, then of course you can, but it's not recommended. You generally want to leave those types of things at the role level where you're actually dictating what they can see and interact with. So that's everything from this transaction body field. So I do want to save this. We've selected that it's going on these sales. We've displayed that it's not going to go anywhere, and I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So we're good with this as is. I'm going to come up here to save, and instead of selecting just save, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say save and apply to forms. And I'll show you what that does. So it saves it and it brings us to this field. And you might have noticed on the previous, if you backtrack, there was actually a button on that transaction custom body field where it said apply to form. So I could have done it earlier, but it brings us here where we earlier, remember we checked that box saying this applies to sales type transactions, and we could have selected other ones. This is where we can see all of the different types of forms that are in that category, let's say sales, and exactly how do we want this field to react to all of those different forms. So you can see we've got forms that are related to assembly builds, bills, credits. None of these apply, but things that are related to sales do apply. So you can see these check boxes here. These are for cash refunds, for sales. And if we come down here, we can see all of these sales orders. These were the things that we wanted to influence. And specifically, we wanted to do it for this particular form, the one that said sales order. But we're actually fine with it being available for the other forms as well. So I'm going to leave all of these checked, which basically enables it to be on these forms. You can see there's a couple additional fields here that I'm not going to get into for the sake of this video, but on the right, this is where we dictate the type of field this is. So as I commented, there's the 4 types, and we could select that for this particular form. Maybe we want it to be normal here, but if there's a different form that only sales reps interacted with, maybe we want to make it disabled. We've got a few different options. So you could change it really form to form how you want this field to interact. And then on the far right here, we have what is this field going to be called on this particular form. So the field overall is called gift, but we could say that on a particular form, let's say this one, gift to customer. We could add additional text so it's renaming how this thing is for that particular form. So we're actually fine with the way this is set up. So we're going to come way back to the top here and we're going to hit save. So it says it has not changed because we didn't actually modify anything. So we're fine with that. So we're now saving it and we've gone through the apply to forms step. So that's now a done deal. We're going to come back to our sales order record. And now that we've gone through creating that field, we can now start customizing this particular form to place the field exactly where we want it. So we're going to come back up to customize, and this time we're going to select customize form. All right, so we're going to come up here and we've got our custom transaction form for sales orders. And before I really dive into the various options here, I think there's a mindset that you should have when you're customizing forms. And the reason it's important to think this way is because it doesn't operate how we would often expect things to operate in this day and age, where so many things that we deal with on our iPhones and iPads and touch screens, so many things are drag and drop capable. And so I came back to the home dashboard here because this is a perfect example where if I want to move this portlet, I simply click it and I drag it wherever I want. It's very intuitive. It's very simple. A kid could pick it up in about 30 seconds, understand that basic capability of moving things around and customizing it the way they visually want to interact with it. That's not how customizations work at all in NetSuite. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an old system. It's a little archaic in this way. So the way that things need to be moved around is, if you can imagine that drag and drop is not available, things become a lot more complicated. You got to think about it a little bit more like a grid system, or almost like map coordinates, where you want something to go from one side of the screen over to a totally different side. You can't simply drag and drop it. You need to give the computer information so that it knows exactly where to put it. So if you've got this grid system, it's almost like you're saying, go 9 columns over, 9 spaces down, 2 a little bit over to the right, and make it 14 spaces long, etc. You got to give it a lot of these really specific details that are not visually oriented, so that NetSuite knows where to put the fields and how to organize everything on the form. So with that concept in mind, a lot of this starts to simplify. It seems complicated at first, but if you can think with that, it starts to clarify a little bit. So what we're dealing with is really all the major aspects of the customization lies in these tabs at the bottom. So, and I'm going to jump back and forth between the sales order just to give you that visual concept. The first thing that you can deal with are tabs. So just like I showed you on the sales order earlier in this video, there's the main section and then there's all the sub tabs. So this tab here is showing all of the sub-tabs that exist on this particular sales order form. Over from that, we have the field groups. So if I come back to the sales order, every one of these light blue lines here, these are all field groups, and they really serve no other purpose than to visually break up information. So everything that's been arbitrarily considered primary information, that's all put under this field group, primary information. So if I come back to this, we've got all the field groups labeled out here. We can organize them in terms of which columns come first. If they're just a single column, or maybe you can have several field groups across the page. You got a few different options there. Over from that, we have screen fields. This is where you're actually dictating what are the fields that live within those either subtabs or those field groups. Then from there, we have actions. Again, if I come over to this record, everything that you see at the top here, these are all actions. Some of them are buttons, and some of them will live within this little drop-down message, actions. This one just has 2, but in many instances, especially if you have a record that's already been created, you could have 10 actions just within that drop-down menu. So all of these different buttons and actions are available here. So you can see there's actually quite a few different options. You can see some are put within the menu and some are included as their own button. Back up to the top here, we have sub lists. So if you remember, I mean, this is a perfect example. This is a sub tab bar, this dark blue, and this is a sub list bar. So if we go back to our sales order, we can dictate what sub-tabs will be available and which will be seen, but we can also dictate, if I come to a particular tab here, we can dictate what sublists live within this sub-tab. So this one has messages, events, tasks, phone calls, files, user notes. All of these sublists can be found under this sublist. So if I come to communication, you'll see the sublists that are available, and you can rearrange them. You can make some unavailable. You can make others shown. So that's the basic concept. Sublist fields, you would think those are all the fields that exist within sublists. Funny enough, that's actually not the case at all. This one is specifically applying to, if we come back to the sales order and we go to items, this one is specifically referring to if I have an item selected here, every one of these columns is considered its own field. And this, if we want to take off some of these columns or add additional ones that are maybe custom, we would do that by selecting sublist fields and modifying these, rearranging them, etc. There are a few additional things. I'm not going to comment on that for the sake of this video, but I think that gives you a basic orientation to kind of how things get structured. So we've got everything from the sub-tab to the sublists, the field groups, the fields themselves. You've got all of these different things. And within them, you can kind of tell NetSuite, this is exactly where I want to put this. I want to put it in this column, in this sub-tab, down here, 4 down from this one, and that's how it's going to get placed. So you have a lot of flexibility there. And although it's not intuitive, if you can get the hang of it, it's got a lot of potential. Now, let's get back to our specific example where we want to take this gift field and we want to place it in our main section of the sales order. So let's come over to screen fields, because that's where we're going to find the field itself. Now we want it here in this main section, right? The main is the top part, and these are all the different subtabs and all the fields that live within those subtabs. But we didn't place it in the main. Remember, I unselected that box, so it's actually not going to place it in here. Even though we want it here, we're not going to find it here. So if you leave that box, that field blank, and it doesn't know where to place the field, what it's going to do in every instance is it's going to put it in a field, or a tab I should say, called custom. So it's going to make this custom tab, and it's going to put everything it doesn't know what to deal with, it's going to put it right here. So if we scroll down here, we're going to find at the bottom our gift field. So it exists right here. We want it to be in the main subtab. So how do we move it from one tab to the next? Because again, this is not drag and drop capable. I can move it within this subtab. Like I could place it higher or lower within the custom tab, but I can't move it to another tab. So the way I would actually do that is right here, move elements between subtabs. If I click on that, it's going to say, are you sure you want to move? We do. So we select that, and it brings us to this list where we can see, again, the main section as well as every additional section. And the custom one is where we want to go. And again, we're going to come to the bottom here. We've got our gift, and here's where we can select what tab do we want to move this to. So we want to move it to the main. Now, what if you had 10 different custom fields that you had created all at once, and they were all placed in the custom, and you want to move them over to a totally different tab? How do you move them all at once without having to manually go through each by each? You can actually come over here and select these tabs. And once you have a bunch selected, you can simply come up here and select, let's say you wanted them all to go to accounting. You could put in there and hit apply, and it moves them all at once. So in this particular case, we're only trying to influence gift. So we're totally fine with that. We're going to come up here and we're going to hit save. And that's going to move our gift out of custom and over into main. So it saved that, and now it brings us back to customizing the form itself. Now, if we come over to screen fields, and we can stay in this main section, because if we come down to the bottom here, we're going to find our gift. Now, before I do anything else, I probably need to orient you a little bit to this page. I'm going to scroll up here so you can see the headers for these. Each one of these is a field. You can see the title here. This tab is where you're basically dictating, is this field going to be shown or not? It's basically the equivalent of saying, is it hidden or not? So instead of being able to select hidden here, it only has normal, inline, or disabled, and you would check yes or no if it's hidden or not. You can also select whether it's mandatory or not, like if it has that little asterisk where if the person has that field available, they have to fill it in. And you've got a few different things. You can put in custom descriptions, and you can put them in certain field groups. So we want to move our gift field from currently no field group that it currently is. We want to move it up to the primary information. Just to orient you, if we're back on our sales order, it is not currently in any field group. We want to move it up into this field group, and we want to put it just below memo. So the way we do that is we come over here and we go back down to our tab, or I should say our little field here, and we're going to select that it is part of primary information. We have to do that first. We can't just grab it and drag it all the way to the top. It won't be allowed. It'll only go so far. So once we've dragged it up, now if we come up to primary information, it's basically put at the bottom of primary information. And what we want to do here is we want to grab it and we want to put it right underneath memo. Because even though there's these other ones, notice they're not shown. So these ones exist, but they're not being shown on this particular form. So we want to be placed directly beneath memo. So we're going to select that here. And we could do a few additional things. Notice on the far right here, we have more kind of orientation and placement features. We can make a column break. That's basically saying if you want to take something that's in one column, you want to break it off into its own column, you can select that. You can put how much spacing is between the various fields. You can orient them so they match up with other fields that are on the same horizontal line. So you've got a few different options, but we're fine with it as it is. So we're going to leave that as is, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to hit save. All right, now if we come back to our sales order, So this form now should have this gift field, but obviously we need to refresh it first. So I'm going to come up here and hit refresh. I'll hit reload on that. And just like that, I've got my little gift checkbox, and I come over here and select it. And of course that would indicate, as we had specified on the field itself, that this is saying the customer does want to purchase this item and then gift it to a friend, family member, etc. And that's your introduction to customizing forms and fields. Again, if you want more information on this subject in general, check out the Administrator's Fundamentals course, where I dive into it in great detail. But if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. And currently, there's only about 15% of the people that watch these videos are actually subscribed. So if you do find videos like this helpful, then please hit that subscribe button if you want access to more videos. I do a new video every single week on this channel. So with that, I'll see you in the next video.